religion in East Tennessee. So there should be. I guess I can do a better job marketing it the next time I teach it. But I thought it'd be just easier saying, come to my class, like Mike, for example, and Carrie and Nikki, and so that's how I did it this time. I had a class I was supposed to teach in October in Oak Ridge, and we had nobody sign up for it because it wasn't really, the exposure wasn't there. And next time I'll probably hit the churches and stuff like that, and so maybe make it a little bit more interesting to the masses, like a better way to say it.
You do Raven Mass, so you need some sort of ad.
I do have it on I do have it on the scroll. Yeah, I had it before. Yeah.
Do you have an ad in
No, yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, we'll do that. So
market it to the Oracle people in Oak Ridge too.
yeah. And there's also a Unitarian church, and there's Catholic churches and stuff that I thought they'd be interested, especially Unitarians, since they're more pluralists, so to speak. So anyway, well, I've taught. I taught for a Danish company, computer science, before I got here, and I taught at a troubled school, math. And at the time I was getting my master's degree from a Jesuit school, which is in Mobile, Alabama. So I did several things teaching, but I've never actually taught religion. It's always been my passion. And so for this class, I want to talk about the early Israelites, basically, and go up into Judaism a little bit and hit some of the fine points. Because even in one little piece of Judaism, you have a scholar. So you have a scholar that does the early Israelites, and then you have a scholar that does the Orthodox Judaism and some of the other Reformed Judaism. So for me to teach this in 2 days wouldn't do it justice. So I'm gonna hit some of the high points and try to tell you what I've seen the scholars say about, for example, the Exodus, Genesis, and some others. I'm going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah a little bit, some of those. So hopefully I won't bore you to death. But anyway, thanks for being here. So anyway, I wanted to start with basically how Judaism began. It began with Abraham. And so Abraham came from Mesopotamia, and I've got another slide on this, to Canaan, which was across the Middle East, I guess. And I think where Mesopotamia now is Jordan, Iraq, Jordan South, right? Yeah, Mike's. I'm in here teaching scholars basically, so I'm teaching a scholar back there, and so it makes it a little hard to know if I'm teaching young people, because they'll just kind of look like this, and they don't have a clue. So, but someone like Carrie, who's well versed as well, and Nikki, and so. But anyway, all right. So Abraham came from Mesopotamia to Canaan, so the story says, okay, in Genesis, and he had 2 sons, Ishmael with his maiden named Hagar, okay, and then he had Isaac with Sarah, which was his wife. Okay, Sarah early on was supposed to be barren, couldn't have kids, so then he had Ishmael first. Okay, and then but God bestowed a gift on Sarah where she could have Isaac, and then started the Christian Jewish faith from there. Now Ishmael started Islam. So, but all of this is pretty much a myth, okay? So Abraham is not a historical figure. He never really exists, as most scholars would say. So when Judaism started, they started with Isaac because Isaac was with his wife, and that was Sarah. And then Jacob, this 12 tribes descended off Jacob, and I'm going to go into this a little bit detail in a little bit. Esau was the twin of Jacob, and he was actually identical twin in every way, but he was a bad boy. So in the way that he was, the symbolism here is because Esau was not a good boy and Jacob was a very good boy. If you guys heard stories about Jacob, didn't they make a play or something about, what was that play? Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen that.
So anyway, so he was a good boy, he was not. They were identical twins. The symbolism there is that you can't blame your heritage on what what you do. Okay, so we had the 12 tribes, and I'll explain some of this in a little bit. Ishmael, now, when the Prophet Muhammad in Islam was supposedly in a cave getting his transmissions from the angel Gabriel, okay, saying God's, this is God's word, okay, and he's taken, he's up in this cave and he's getting the transmissions. He's supposed to be descendant of Ishmael, okay, from Hagar. And Sarah sent them to the desert because she was mad at Hagar for taking time with her husband, Abraham. Okay, so they were sent, Hagar and Ishmael were sent to the desert where God provided for them. Okay, and that's the story. Again, this is a myth. This is not historically accurate. Okay.
Any of those individuals historically accurate?
No.
No.
No. So, all right, so my personal opinion, and I'm not supposed to do that since I'm teaching, but I'm going to tell you my personal opinion, is that when Muhammad was getting his transmissions from this cave, I personally believe that he got some of it, the message of equality and some of that, and I'm going to talk about this next week in the Islam class. But I think this Ishmael, he said, well, the Jews and the Christians went this way. We're going to go this way. That's my personal opinion. Okay. This way, the Jews came off, said, "Oh, well, we're descendant of Isaac and of Jacob." I think he said, "Oh, well, we must be descendant of Ishmael then." Okay, because he hated the Christians. Well, no, he didn't hate the Christians, no, because because maybe it makes a little bit more sense. Because they descended. No, how could we descend? Because Christianity was.
He wanted to be able to descend straight from Abraham.
Right. Because Muhammad had a belief in one God, okay, as well as the Christians and the Jews. Okay, so this is just again my personal opinion, because it makes sense because this is not a historical figure. So coming off this, Muhammad, knew the Bible, he knew Genesis, and so. My personal opinion says that he says, oh, well, Ishmael's our guy. Okay, that's what I think. Okay, so, and there's also some other things that I'll talk next week when we go through the, talk about the prophet. So, any questions so far? No? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about Semitic languages. Everybody's heard anti-Semitism, right? Okay. Well, it's really a misnomer because anti-Semitism means you're being against the languages of several faiths. Okay. So the Hebrew Bible is written in Hebrew. That's a Semitic language. The Quran the Islam book, holy book, is written in Arabic. That's Semitic language as well. Okay, and then what Christ spoke, Aramaic, is a Semitic language too. So I just wanted to make a point here. Yiddish is from later on Semitic as well. The Jews had ended up in Eastern Europe, and so we have these languages. So when people say anti-Semitism, it's really kind of a misnomer. If you go back, I guess you go back to the very start of languages, it was the Jews, because they were before anybody. So maybe that's how the whole anti-Semitism comes up. But I just wanted you to know that. So when you hear that, obviously anti-Semitism is a bad thing, but it's kind of a misnomer there. So, and what is interesting, the Hebrew, the Jews believe Hebrew is the holy tongue, God's holy tongue, passed down to them. Okay. The Arabs, the Muslims, believe that Arabic is God's holy tongue too. So you have two different perspectives on that. Okay, so in the Quran they say the only right way to read it, understand it, is in Arabic, not in English or translations or anything like that. So, and it's similar in the Hebrew Bible, because those things have been, edited and changed and things like that. So it's similar there, and there's definitely symbolism there. So you have any questions? No?
What is the symbolism you're referring to?
Well, the symbolism is that God speaks this special language, and to understand, to speak with God, you have to know this language. And that's big in Islam. In Islam, they believe that is the absolute holy tongue of God, Arabic. And the Jews believe Hebrew is, but not so much. And I haven't read a lot about Jews and their belief in Hebrew as holy tongue, but I've read quite a bit on Islam and Arabic being very important. So when you read the Quran, they're saying you're supposed to read it in Arabic to really get the gist of it, to understand it, to speak with God, to communicate with God. So.
I guess there's kind of a parallel with that too in Catholicism, and if they stick with the Latin
Right.
For so long, was it sort of the same idea? That
Yes. Latin came a little bit later. So, and there was biblical, the Latin Vulgate was the Latin version of the Bible. And then you had Greek too, where they did a Greek version of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. Okay? Because the Greeks, and I'm going to go through this in a minute, the Greeks later on became a powerhouse. Okay? And the Jews had problems with them. So the Greeks translated it, and the Jews during that time would read Greek and had to learn Greek, so then they translated the Bible, and they call it the Greek Septuagint, which is the Old Testament. So yeah, any more questions? No? Okay. So, all right, there's an inscription. It's called a stela. A stela is like a rock, and what the old Egyptians used to say, a victory like a trophy, for lack of a better way to say it. Don't lose me now, Carrie. Wake up. Okay. So it's basically a rock. It's like a trophy. And this one is called a Merneptah stela because Merneptah was the son of a Egyptian pharaoh called Ramses II. Okay. So this man had this victory stela where it speaks of the Israelites, Israel right here. This is the only archaeological evidence of the Israelites besides the Hebrew Bible. This is it right here. Go ahead.
Well, I
Please
mean, I don't
debate.
know if my question is relevant here.
No, go-
Or just something for you to think about answering as we go along.
Okay.
But at what point do you believe that myth, okay, Abraham, is there any point that the Bible starts naming historical figures in your opinion? Or, I won't say the Bible, but
I
Old
think
Testament.
my personal opinion. You want my personal opinion,
I want your
Carrie?
personal opinion.
I think that they were groups, and I'm going to talk about this later. They were groups like the Israelites who were slaves, and they were in these sort of like states, okay, where you had kings, you had upper class and lower class, and as a scholar says, have and have nots, basically. Okay, so these Israelites basically get tired of it, sort of like what's happening in politics today, where Republicans or even independents or whoever are saying we're not happy with everything, so they're voting in all these new people, and there's what was it, 1/3 of completely new people in the Congress now, or something like that. So there was sort of an uprising to say we're not happy with, because you guys are the haves, we're the have-nots. So I think there was all symbolism here. I think they're saying, and I'm going a little bit ahead of this, but I think they're writing down the best way to live is in simplicity, without a king or somebody ruling over you or telling you what to do. And so I think that when they wrote the Bible, they said they were trying to convey that message. Okay. And so that's why you get some crazy things, because little pieces of story were added, what this is right, this is wrong, kind of stuff like that. Okay, because so I think it's just to convey the live simply kind of message there. And I'm going to
So they
talk.
make up fake people and fake origins and fake.
Say it again. Sorry.
So they invent fake origins and fake
Yes.
patriarchs. And
Yes.
stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
In the dating of that king there,
Uh-huh.
what date would that place on the period of time that the Israelites were in Egypt? What's the closest that you get to that?
All right. They were actually, there was famine. When Abraham came from Mesopotamia to Egypt, there was famine. I'm sorry, Mesopotamia to Canaan, there was famine, and it forced a lot of his people into Egypt. Okay, so that's where the victory starts here. And you still have, and then later on, Moses takes them out of Egypt with the Exodus. Okay, and that's the big symbolism story too, because there's no historical evidence of Exodus. Okay, it's not historical. They think it was this.
No, I mean, I'm just curious on, and I'm not doing this to be belligerent because I actually.
No, I want you to debate.
But I'm
I want debates. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to figure out at what point does myth become reality or become historical figure.
Well, I'm going to show you
You're
that in a
gonna
minute.
get that.
Yes, David probably was a historical figure.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
At what point did they quit inventing fake whatever
Right.
and start doing real people?
Well, they're telling stories because they want people, we're going to tell our story the way we would want it to be. And then people, their generation ahead would say, hey, it needs to be like this. That's what the Ten Commandments were. Ten Commandments were a reminder to the Israelites to not make the same mistakes as their Babylonian captors. Okay, that was a reminder. So basically, you love your God, do not kill, do not steal, stuff like that. So again, there's symbolism there.
Well, it seems like there's also an issue of oral tradition, and when you go from, these stories that have been passed down verbally to actually putting it down in a hard copy and it's almost like a game of telephone. You tell the same story, it kind of evolves, it changes, and
Right.
it suits the situation that you're currently in. So, I as far as just making things up out of thin air, it probably was rooted in an oral story at first, for some stories, not for some of the later stuff, but, I mean, some of the events that have been written were supposedly documented, who knows
Right.
how much later. It's not like when the event happened, they went and wrote the Bible. I mean, those stories were written down long after those events have been claimed to have actually occurred.
Right. And that's, I'm sorry, go Mike.
Don't you see that with the opening chapters of Genesis where there's that shift almost in mid-chapter between one version of
Yes.
the creation and
Yes, I'm going to explain that too. There were 5 different writers of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Pentateuch, what Christians call it, first 5 books of the Bible. And I'm going to explain that too. But they were 5. Most scholars agree that there were 5 different writers of the Torah.
As opposed to Moses.
Right, as opposed to Moses writing the Torah, right. So, which Torah means law.
Well, I mean, I'm still curious on at what point do you trust, or does the archaeological evidence come into play that yes, this person existed? I really don't know. I'm really curious on when that happens.
I think you take it, and this is where the Catholics differ a little bit than the Protestants. The Catholics say the Bible's important, but there's all these other books too. The Protestants, not all Protestants, some Protestants say the Bible's it. Okay, and why do you need anything else? And I think this is where you have to take these things as stories, as symbolism that these people learned. We can learn from them and go forward and do better. Because I'll explain this too later, but the pottery they found from the Israelites versus the Egyptians and the Philistines and some of these others was very simple. Because obviously they came to the conclusion that living a simple life is better versus being in a hierarchy kind of situation. So.
And some of the pharaohs that are in the earlier part of the story here have some historical
Yes.
documentation in the background.
Yes. Some of these pharaohs are historical figures, yes. So that's where you have the difference, because you might have had a small group of say, Israelites that were under this pharaoh that escaped and then wrote the story. This is the way it should be. We were bigger than that. We were better than that. So yeah, some of the Egyptians are actual historical figures. And this is not to discredit, any of our beliefs, but it's just you can say that the Bible was inspired. God inspired it. The people that wrote it back then. Doesn't mean it has to be historically accurate, which most scholars agree on that. Actually, one of my professors said the whole entire Torah was just myth. The first 5 books of the Bible was just myth. But I don't believe that. I believe King David existed. So, okay. You have any more questions? I'm going to talk about a lot of this. The rate I'm going, I'll never be finished. All right, I just talked a little bit about Moses going from Mesopotamia to Canaan. And Mike corrected me when I said Jordan was in the wrong place in Iraq and all that kind of stuff. But Jerusalem is right here.
Now?
it's
It's
Iraq, right?
Iraq, yeah. Jordan, I think, is down here somewhere, right? Yeah.
Because the Tigris and the Euphrates, they converged
Oh, okay.
there.
Yeah.
And that was the fertile
Yeah.
triangle.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not.
Terrible at geography.
Well, I'm not great. I forget it because I'm always looking at these old maps for studying theology. Okay, so again, I mentioned there was famine and then they ended up in Egypt with hard labor, and this is where the Moses story starts. Okay, and this is 4,000 years ago too. Okay, so this you'll find interesting, Carrie. You're going to like this. Okay, well, first we know about the Dead Sea Scrolls when it comes to the Bible. The Bible, the only oldest Hebrew Bible we had was from the 9th century CE, Common Era, okay, until they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls dated, say, 3rd century BCE.
So that was about 1,000 years earlier.
Right. Which is good, because then we have now these scrolls that show what was written in the Bible that we had, the Hebrew Bible, is accurate. That doesn't mean, I mean, they match it, doesn't mean it actually happened in history. But they have this, they know that someone didn't change it a million times over. And it was completely wrong. So that's a good thing. Okay, so the Philistines are depicted as negative. And here's symbolism here, which Jewish symbolism. And you can show their food source as pig and boar, okay? So then what do we have later? We have kosher foods that say you don't eat pork. Now, I personally think, Carrie, and I'm not supposed to do that, but when you get into theology, it's hard not to have your personal thoughts if you study it from a scholarly perspective. I think the pork back then was dirty, and today it's not, and so that's part of the reason why. Okay, but a lot of scholars say that because the Philistines were depicted as a negative people, and they were eating swine, pig, and the Israelites saying, "Oh, we don't like them, so we're not gonna eat pig." So a little bit of symbolism there. Okay.
Philistines again was just a group of
Yeah, they
is that
were.
nationality.
Yeah. Yeah, they were a group back then.
Philistine.
Yes. And if I can't answer something, I'll email you guys the answer. Because I don't have a PhD, I just have a master's, but I do the best. I've studied this to death. So, okay. Now, here's more symbolism here. Okay. You have Ramses III, which was the son after Meneptah, Ramses II, Meneptah, and there was something. Yes, was because you have the relief here. Okay, took the Philistines into slavery, severed their hands, and these scribes would hand the Pharaoh the hands. You can see it right here. Okay, saying, "We caught all these guys, here are their hands." And there's something else they would give to the Pharaoh. It's called a phallus.
Why do you think I like that?
because you're you, that's why. Everybody understand what a phallus is?
No.
Okay. Now, here's the symbolism. Again, the Philistines, the Israelites didn't like the Philistines, thought they were crude, dirty, whatever, and they weren't circumcised. Hence, you have circumcision. Okay.
To be opposite of the Philistines.
Right.
Well, that's going to some extreme to be opposite.
Right, right. I used to think it might have something to do with like cleaning out the extra, some symbolism behind there. I mean, this is just what a scholar. This is what some scholars think. Okay, so you can decide for yourself. Do your reading and decide why this circumcision? Why? And this is what this makes sense to me. So
Does that mean that they delivered
yes.
Ramses the foreskin and the hands?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Down here somewhere, you can see it. I didn't make it too big because it's anyway. So Any questions on that? No, Jim? Okay. Okay, so, all right, Moses took the Israelites out of bondage after God sent these 10 plagues over the Egyptian Pharaoh. Okay. And it was the last plague where his son was slayed and he let them go home. Now the way it worked was the Hebrews would mark their doors with lamb's blood. Okay. So the angel of death would pass over their doors and would only slay the Egyptians. Okay, because this Pharaoh had plenty of warning, and he wouldn't do anything until God, again the story says God's angel had to kill the son. So then the celebration, a big celebration in Judaism, is Passover, Peso in Hebrew. So because the angel passed over their doors, it's a pretty big celebration. And also, they eat this thing called the Seder, which is like if you're Catholic, like the host, pardon? The bread, Christ, yeah. So there, it wasn't leavened because they didn't have time to wait for the bread. So there's more symbolism here. Now, exactly what the symbolism behind patience, whatever, I don't know, but that's the story. That's how the story goes, and you guys have probably heard it bunches of times. And again, the mass exodus lacks historical evidence. I mean, that's agreed upon by almost all scholars, biblical scholars. And the wandering for 40 years. 40 is Moses went and wandered in the desert with everybody for 40 years. 40 is actually a symbolic number because it mathematically, it fits a certain way into equations. Now, I don't remember the exact equation, but I've looked it up. But it was so complicated how the number 40 works that I said I was going to put it in here, and I said, no. But there's symbolism. And think about 40 and how many nights was Christ in the wilderness or whatever, was 40, right? Where he was fasting and he was tempted by the devil and everything. It was 40. So 40 is a symbolic number.
Same for the ark.
Pardon?
Isn't it rain for 40
Yes,
days?
yes, I was going to mention that too on note the flood. Okay. So there's reasons why they did these stories. So there's always reasons. Okay. Y'all have questions? No? Okay, so I mentioned the 40 years wandering in the desert, and at the base of this Mount Sinai, Moses got the 10 Commandments, which I think were a reminder for them not to make the mistake as their captors. And this actually is a quote. This actually comes from one of my professors who's a biblical scholar. He thinks that. I think it too. So his name's Tim Carmody. So then God gave to Moses the Torah plus the books of the prophets and the writings. And that's the whole Hebrew Bible. The Torah is the first 5 books, which means law. And the Christians call it the Pentateuch. And the Christians also call it Hexateuch if you include the book of Joshua, which is the next book. And Joshua was the one that led the military campaign into Canaan. And we're going to find out that that's not historically accurate either, because the the Israelites, again, what I mentioned earlier, talking about a hierarchy and everything, were trying to make a story symbolic to themselves, future generations, saying, simplicity is the way to go. Okay, there are, I forgot now, 613 commandments in the Torah that rabbis have later decided. And that's what this statement means right here. And this is from another scholar, Christine Hayes at Yale University. So there's no area outside of God's interest. Hebrew Bible has it all. 613 commandments decided by rabbis later on. That's a lot of, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. Okay, so, you have questions?
Yeah,
Sarah?
I'm just trying to sort through the mythological angle so is there something written down in history that talks about mistakes Egyptians actually made, or is that
Well,
just
it was
all part of the story?
Yeah, well, I mean, they were, they took slaves, they had kings, they had a hierarchy, and the Jews, the Israelites at the time, suffered tremendously under them. So that, yeah.
Even though previously your slide said there's no historical evidence that they were ever.
Well,
On Exodus.
It also said there's no previous evidence.
there's question.
Yeah.
There's question on that, or was it a small group of people that were there? And they say there was no mass exodus, thousands of people. Okay, there's no evidence, but there might have been a small group of people that made an exodus. Okay,
A
so
small group of people that was indeed slaves.
right, slaves under the, because we know they were slaves, whether they were huge or not, we don't know because of the stela, Meneptah stela that I showed earlier, the victory stela that says, "Hey, we beat you," and it has Israel on the bottom of this. So we know for a fact that there were some people there, but there was no mass group of people probably, and that's a question. Again, it's if you study it, it's up to you to if you want to study, you believe it, you don't.
And I think you could consider, since this is supposed to be the book of the chosen people, that however many were in captivity come to stand for the whole.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that. That's a big point. And that's actually, they consider that a radical idea. Because when you talk about, and I'm going to talk a little bit, when you talk about apartheid, and when Naomi Tutu was here, I asked her a question. I says, well, if you're Christian, South Africa's Christian, and it's hard to ignore love thy neighbor. I mean, love thy enemy. Forget love thy neighbor, love thy enemy, right? Christ said that, right? So how were these people so cruel to blacks and African Americans in Southern Africa? And her question was, well, you go back to the chosen people, and you had Noah, who had a son, Ham, who saw him naked, okay? And so Noah cursed him, but the curse went on his youngest son, Canaan, and hence you have the Canaanites, okay? So, and what happened to Canaan? He was black. He turned black. So there's the theology behind the apartheid. She thinks that was one. We didn't go into. I need to read a book on the apartheid. What was that was one possibility. Okay, on why Africa was apart. What was it? That was it, right? What we're talking about. Well, we're talking about the freedom and all that, and the chosen people. Yeah.
Self and others.
Right. And we're going to find out later from my slides that even in the Bible it says that the chosen people were really different folks from different places in that area that were just fed up with their so-called government, and they came together. And I think the whole thing is symbolic because because when you start saying chosen people, you have some of these crazies that quote the Bible and hold a rebel flag or whatever and say, a black man has no place. Because they say, oh, we're the chosen people. And they go back, way back, and they quote that Noah story. Okay. There's one guy that just became a congressman in Arkansas that says stuff like that, basically. So, okay. You have questions? I think I'm moving a little too slow here. All right, they're saying that, and you know what, I think I meant to put another little picture here, so my apologies, but I was doing this like working and doing this my own time and stuff, so, and why Carrie's bothering me half the time. All right, they say Moses, a lot of scholars say Moses has Hebrew roots, with his mom being Hebrew. I don't remember now what his dad was exactly. And they see similarity between his name and the Egyptian name Ramses and Tutmosis, who was another pharaoh. Okay. But the reason why I don't like this argument is because, and I don't remember the exact details, but he was stuck in the river in a little basket. And he was found by the Egyptian pharaoh who had mercy on him or something. So, I didn't look into detail, how he got his name and all that. But that's just what one scholar says. The similarity there, And this is what's really interesting. And this is where you talk about what's historical and what's not. This is where there's a question. All right, in 586, the Babylonians, and I'm going to get to that. I'm jumping ahead the way I put this together. Babylonians destroyed the temple, and there were burnt houses, and they found these things called bulai, which are sealed documents. Okay, now so what bulai is? They wrap these papers, scrolls, in string, and then they have a clay seal on them, and then the person, say a prophet or something that wrote this, would take his ring and mark the clay seal, and that would say he wrote it. It belongs to him. Okay, so when clay over time, what happens to it? It turns into mud, right, Nikki? Okay. But when clay is fired, what do you have? You have kind of like a pottery. So they found some of these in this burnt house, and with some biblical names on these little clay seals because they became fired, which is really interesting. So then you have, Carrie, the question, are they really historical? Or were they just part of a clan or something? So again, so what I say, I mean, scholars know the Exodus didn't happen. But were there some of these...
There's no evidence that the Exodus happened.
There's no evidence, I'm sorry. There's no evidence that the Exodus happened. But there are evidence that some of these prophets and stuff, biblical figures, did live. And this is one example. And it's actually, I got the name wrong. This is the grandson. It's another person. So when I put this together, Shaphan is the dad. And I've got it written on my notes somewhere. Anyway, I'll find it later. But Shaphan is the dad, and he had a son, and they found his ring, and they found another one too. They found a couple. I don't remember the name of the other one. So that's interesting. You know, that maybe these biblical figures did really exist. Okay, now this is another very interesting story, and Carrie's going to like this one, and Nikki too. Okay, the God of Israel, everybody knows, is Yahweh. I mean, anybody in the street knows about Yahweh, pretty much. Okay, there were a nomadic tribe called the Shasu that lived in this region down here. It's actually called Midian, and the city was called Yahu or Yahweh or something like that. All right. So, as Moses was traveling he gets to burning bush, take off his shoes, and God says, my real name is Yahweh. Okay. Really, a lot of scholars, because of this, think that he inherited from the Shasu people in the land of Midian, right here. And what's really interesting is his father-in-law, who he met somewhere around this time, was a Midianite. His name was Jethro. So his father-in-law believed in this God, Yahweh, and hence Yahweh. That's how a lot of scholars think the name came about, not from the burning bush, because these people were worshiping Yahweh. So, and all right, so I'm going to mention a couple scholars that are good. Jody Magnus, she's from UNC. Israel Finkelstein, he's from somewhere in Israel, I don't remember. But both these guys know their stuff, and they've done their work. William Deaver from Arizona, University of Arizona, a top archaeologist. He knows his stuff too. So I've got my bibliography with all their names. I haven't posted it yet or anything. But so a lot of these guys believe this. And again, it's not to sway your faith. It's just to understand the history behind it, you know. So this is actually a quote from William Deaver. He said the Bible wants to say, hey, the burning bush and God revealed it to you, and the symbolism behind that, I'm not sure exactly what it is right now, but it wasn't discovered through meeting the Midianites here. All right. Questions? No? Okay, so yeah, here's where I wrote a little bit too much. Talked about Jethro. 40 years. How Yahweh is similar, so I've already really talked about this. Land of Midian. These Midians right here. So I've already went through this. All right, let me go. Okay, now, another thing that's interesting, and not that I want to derail the old Israelites, but in fact, archaeology doesn't lie. There's a lot of these sects back then. The Canaanites, Babylonians were polytheists. They believe in multiple gods. And the old days, people thought the Israelites were monotheists, okay, because of Yahweh and everything, Abraham. But in fact, they found archaeological evidence that shows that some of them were still polytheists, believing in a mother goddess and things like that. So. Some of them were, and they say, well, maybe they weren't supposed to be, but they still were. maybe they were part of this Israelite clan, and they say, oh, well, we still want to believe what these other guys believe, the Babylonians and the idols and all that. So we know from archaeology that there's pretty good evidence here on that.
I have a question. The top picture looks like a mother and a child,
Yeah,
and the bottom just looks like a handprint.
yeah.
So, how can you determine that it's an idol or a god rather than just a piece of art?
Well, they found it right in the area. It's where they found it too.
It was like a worshiping area,
Yeah.
or some sort of.
It was in Jerusalem, somewhere around that area, where they placed the Israelites. And so they found that, and then their take is, this is an idol, and they worshipped it. Okay. Now,
What's the handprint again?
just a handprint of a god or something, or what's supposed to be a god. I think it was. I need to look that up though.
I
Yeah.
don't know, I was just thinking like, maybe you could relate it to what you were talking about with the seal, as like a
Yeah.
stamp of identity. I'm thinking now, where you have biometric scan.
Right.
If that handprint were to match up with the handprint of the priest, then it kind of validates the whole.
Right. It could be. I didn't look into that in that much detail, but it's evidence to show this, and I can find out that for you guys tomorrow. Sorry.
Okay. One of the through the Old Testament stories, it seems like God is always disappointed that the Israelites turn to other gods, and then so He punishes them, and then
Right.
they're good for a while, and then
Right. And that's symbolic of their slavery in Egypt, the Babylonian exile, symbolic that they weren't behaving, and God has punished them. But when they turn their lives around, then then God is good to them again, sort of.
Well, and it sounds like there's text to support it, so it's not just the actual figures that have been found, but there's text to help explain and back up the polytheism.
Right. But again, Nikki, you brought up a good point. It could be that they're dead wrong about this. They might not have been polytheists. This could have been, it was found where the Israelites were supposed to be located. But that doesn't mean for sure that they were polytheists. Okay.
or several of them could have been in one of those disobedient periods.
Right, right. And it was so long ago anyway, it doesn't really matter.
And did
So.
they find a bunch of them, or just one?
Well, they found these two.
Because, that kind of goes back to the art question
Mhm.
with,
Right. So again, this doesn't say for sure anything. The only thing we know for sure is there was no mass exodus, okay? Because there's no evidence to show that. There could have been a small exodus, 100 people, 200 people.
What are you talking about? Isn't it just like a whole bunch of broken shards in one area?
Yeah.
I mean, is that what you qualify as evidence?
Well, it's whatever the archaeologists qualify, and that's what they say.
I'm wondering, and this is off the top of my head, I'm just wondering if there would have been such a concept as figurative art, because in the same way we think of it today,
Well, yeah.
that all of these objects that I know of, nothing is purely decorative or an artistic expression. It's tied into some
Something.
symbolic religious impulse.
Right. It could be. And see, so you have to ask the question of scholars, how do you know that? Maybe because of the shape of it, where it was found and all that, they say it was likely, that there were some where were polytheists. but we don't know for sure. So. But we know there were
Or
monotheists
he
later.
Polytheist just traveling and he just dropped it out of his donkey bag.
Anything's possible. Anything. Okay, but this brings me up to a very important question. Very important question in theology. What's the symbolism behind idol worship? And a scholar, I forget his name now, brought this up with Islam, because Islam is it spawned off of Judaism. You know, idols are very bad in Islam, and he said, well, what if there's symbolism there saying, what if the idols are like power and greed and things like that? What if those are the idols? You have the idols, the god of rain or whatever, and the god. What are the old Roman mythology gods? But I think that's a worthy thought. So let's say we go back to this time, and maybe the whole idol worship was to get away from the greed, the power, lust, whatever. Just like that. So there we have maybe a reason, because you have to think, well, what does it matter if you're like kneeling in front of a bunch of rocks or whatever, that could be why. And that could, and in Islam, it's big to avoid idol worship,
Right.
idols.
You can't even depict.
Yeah, you can't depict Muhammad,
Yeah.
right?
Do you think that's linked to, I was just thinking there seems to be the same sort of, even if it's not spelled out, the same sort of prohibition against a vision of God directly in Genesis. You have to have a burning bush. You can't
Right.
actually see
Yeah, see God, right. And that's why the Jews won't spell the whole name. They'll put a dash, G-D, for that reason.
And then it might link up with what you're saying about discovered versus revealed.
Right.
If it is more mysterious,
Right.
if you can't have a physical depiction, it's more
That's right.
mysterious and therefore more potent.
Right. That's right. That's a possibility too. I haven't thought of that. So, but that was quoted from that scholar, University of Arizona. So, you want to take a